What's up, Mountain Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 podcast. For the avid listener, you will have noticed that last week, what should have been episode 177 on May the 6th got dropped. We just missed a week, and it's not because anything's going on or anything unique is happening other than Kevin and I just being in a season right now of insane busyness. And so we weren't able to catch up. We weren't able to load an episode in the queue. And consequently, we gave ourselves a little grace and just say, you know what, we're just going to drop an episode here and not have something for the 6th. And unfortunately, it happened again this week. But what we're going to do now is rerun an episode that we've done this a couple of times where we pick up an old episode that sort of doesn't have or hasn't had the airtime that sort of think it deserves, and so we're going to replay one here. Whenever I was trying to look through the catalog of now 177 episodes to figure out which one we should grab, a couple have jumped out, actually, and unsurprisingly, some of the ones when it's just Kevin and I together are some of the ones that don't actually catch as many listens because the guests draw listeners for us, but I will just not replaying them here, refer everyone back to a couple from way early on that are great episodes to go back to. There was one we did on the value of community. It dropped back in November of 2020, and it was super. We talked about all the different levels of community and folks that you can hang out with and places you can find it and things like that. It was a super episode. So that was actually episode number 13. Again, that's not the one I'm replaying here, but if you have a chance, scroll way down on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening and go find that one. Today, I'm going to take you all the way back to April the 26th, 2021, and we're going to replay in long form episode 37 with Eric Aasen. That one was titled, Do Your Best Work. Eric was, and has now since moved, but was a neighborhood friend of mine who happened to be the managing editor at KERA. And he talked a lot about his story, but there were some really good wisdom nuggets in there, some of which have shown up on the podcast over the years. And one really good one that has stuck in my vernacular, which was listen, advise, or solve. And Eric tells a story about a plaque in his office. I won't spoil the listen for you guys if you haven't heard this episode yet. But that is something that I say regularly that I picked up from Eric back when we recorded years and years and years ago. Kind of a behind the scenes on this episode too this was one of the most difficult edits that I ever had to do. You guys may know, and we talk about it from time to time, less so now, that I do all the editing. So we lay down these tracks, and then I spend time, usually over the weekend, clipping, editing, bringing it forward, mixing it up, so that you get what you hear. And Eric, being the managing editor at KERA, was accustomed to having, a professional editing team, I guess, if you will, cleaning up everything. And so we probably did 4 takes on that episode, in intervals where a story would be told, and you could tell Eric didn't like it, and so he would stop it and tell it again and pick it up and piece it back together, which is probably really common for someone in his industry. But for us, just 37 weeks into doing the podcast, and I was at the time struggling through figuring out how to use the equipment and all of this, I think I sat and edited this particular episode for 4.5 hours to get it cleaned up and publishable. So we're going to rerun it because there are great wisdom nuggets all throughout this. So we will be back with you guys with a guest live from the studio next week. And for now, I will cut you to episode 37 on April the 26th, 2021 with Eric Aasen.
What's up, Mountain Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 podcast. Excited to have our guest today. He probably has more experience doing podcasts and all this sort of radio stuff than we do. But I'd like to introduce Eric Aasen to the show. Thanks for joining, Eric.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to be here.
Yeah, so Eric and I know each other from
years ago.
Yeah,
our kids.
Yeah, we have children that are the same age. So a 7th grader, mine's a boy, yours a girl. And then we have boys that are in the 5th grade, same age. And I guess I've coached Matthew for 4 or 5 years
In basketball. Yeah. And we've been in other sports too. And then
baseball, yeah.
your son and my son, Matthew and Hayes, met each other in preschool, I think.
Oh, really?
And became fast friends there. And that's how their friendship started and blossomed.
I lose track. So they were over at the Arapahoe?
Arapahoe.
Okay. Yeah. See, I totally forgotten about
when they
that.
were like 3 years old.
Yes.
They were, best buds back then. So
does this get your son a starting position with coming on the podcast with the coach?
starting position on his team?
Yeah.
Man,
Matthew's not actually playing. He's not playing. He didn't play this last season.
He took the season off.
I gotcha.
He took the season off.
Yeah.
So
So there you go. That's at least 2 basketball drops within 5 minutes here.
The quota's being
We're
met.
crushing, yeah. All right, so Eric, this is how we get started, and then we'll just kind of dive through your story and figure out where we go. But we usually start with kind of an elevator pitch. Tell us who's Eric Aasen.
I'm Eric Aasen. I'm a journalist. I'm the managing editor at KERA, which is the NPR and PBS station in Dallas-Fort Worth. And I have 20 years of reporting and editing experience. And now I'm a manager and a leader of a newsroom trying to cover the chaos of everyday life in North Texas. Journalism is at the core of who I am. I've wanted to be a journalist since the 3rd grade. It's informed and fueled my life and shaped the contours of my life.
So couple of points to pull back through there, right? And we were joking before we got on the air, but you actually, for those of you who listen to the KERA NPR affiliate, you might recognize Eric's voice because I don't think you've been on for a while, but I used to hear you on all the time.
Yeah. So I've been at KERA for 8 years now. And the first few years I was on the air much more frequently. And as I get more into management and more into leadership, I'm tied into meetings more. I've been on the air to talk about breaking news, to report on news developments, to do conversations with our host about news of the moment. I've been on to ask people for money for memberships, to raise money for the spring and winter and fall membership campaigns on radio and on TV. And I've been on national programs as well to discuss breaking news, of which there's been a lot of over the past several years. So yeah, I do have, and the on-air stuff is a really cool part of it. It's a tool in the toolbox that I like to use and flex those muscles a little bit.
Do you know what my favorite Eric on the air story is?
I think you've told me this, but maybe there's another one.
No, what do you think it is?
Is it when I was asking for money and something about basketball came up?
Yeah. So here's the story, right? So we're headed, I mean, roughly speaking, it's like we have practice like 6 o'clock, right? So I'm at home, get Hayes ready, jump in the car. We're headed over to Campbell Green where we were practicing at the time. I hit that intersection at Spring whatever, and La Manga there in the neighborhood.
Spring Creek and La Manga.
Spring Creek and La Manga. Hit that intersection, and I'm listening to the NPR station, KERA, and you come on. And you say, hey, just if you're on the way to a basketball practice or got, just run an errand in the afternoon, or if you just picked your kids up headed to practice, and I was like, wait a minute.
That felt targeted.
That's literally me.
That was for you, story.
Yeah.
That was testing you out to see if you're listening.
I may or may not have contributed to the station based on that.
But, that's the power and the intimacy of radio is that you form connections with people in more ways that you can do that in radio than in other mediums. And by mentioning that and by personalizing the message to people, hopefully you do form connections that way because people are listening. They're driving around for the most part, running from place to place, right? If it's at 5 or 6 p.m., you're picking up kids or dropping them off at activities or you're going to the grocery store, you're running errands. You're just doing your everyday life and trying to stop people in that moment to connect with them in a way where like, oh yeah, you're talking to me, or that's someone like me, or I know someone like that.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that resonates and they go to the phones and call or go online and make a donation.
There you go. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you had wanted to be a journalist since either 3 or the 3rd grade. I think you said 3rd grade.
The 3rd grade.
So that has to have a story there. Like you don't just
yes
pick that moment in time. Like, so tell us what's that? How does that get in you?
So I'm from suburban Minneapolis, Monroe Elementary School. And I was one of 2 kids at the school selected to take part in a press conference, a mock press conference for students. 2 students were chosen from each school across the school district. And the person we were going to interview was a real life astronaut. His name was Pinky Nelson. He's not a native Minnesotan, but lived in Minnesota much of his life. He went into space and really cool opportunity, right? If you're a kid and you get to learn more about the space program. I don't know why I was selected. I mean, there were hundreds of students at our school. And I was in the 3rd grade in Mr. Vote's class. Mr. Vote, I still remember this time in my life vividly because it lived with me for all these decades later. This was way before the internet. So my dad drove me to the neighborhood library. And I started researching the space program because if you're a reporter, you want to research a topic as much as you can before you go into the interview. So you kind of know what to ask or have a sense of what you might want to talk about. So I went through the periodical section of the neighborhood library, went through the newspapers and Time magazine and read everything I could about the space program. It just was engrossed in this. For several days after school, my dad would drop me off and I would meander the library, and then I would take notes and make copies and make printouts. And then I formed my questions. I wrote down my questions, and then my dad drove me to this other school where the press conference was going to happen. It was in the winter. I remember everything about this day. He drove me to the school. We went to a cafeteria, low hung ceilings in this cafeteria, long tables in the back, but in the front were rows of chairs like you would see at a press conference, like at a presidential press conference or the White House briefing room. And the astronaut Pinky Nelson is up there. And I remember sitting, I have a picture of this day that my dad took. I'm wearing some gray sweater. It's cold in Minneapolis, of course, in December or January. And I don't remember exactly what I asked the astronaut. I don't remember what he said, but I remember taking lots of notes. And I remember going back to school that day after the press conference and finishing up the day at school. But Mr. Vogt, my third grade teacher, wanted me to share with the students what I had learned that day at this press conference. And so he had me sit in a chair in the corner of the room, and all the students gathered around me. And I shared my recollections of that press conference and what Pinky Nelson had to say about the space program and what other students were asking and what I thought about it. And I went home that day knowing that journalism was what I was going to do with my life, that I knew that I was going to be a journalist that very day going home. And I remember everything about that day. I had this incredible moment in my life that was so defining, and it happened at such a young age. And it has fueled everything that's come in my life since. And everything of my life has been built on the foundation of that moment. So to have a moment of clarity like that so early in life, it's such a blessing, and it's formed everything. I mean, everything goes back to that day.
Man, I was just, as you were telling that story, the thought I was having was like, do you appreciate what a gift that is?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, why was I chosen? I don't know. My dad, was able to drive me to the neighborhood library. He took time out of his schedule to get me there. Yeah, it is a gift. It was a wonderful thing. I'm sorry, you were asking.
No, just if you remember, if you just appreciated what a gift that was, because many people go through years and years of their life and never have that moment of clairvoyance. Like, this is it. I found it.
It is the ultimate gift because, yeah, it makes you obsessed and makes you, there's some danger to it, right? That you become so focused, so clear-eyed that there you shut everything else out of your world. But if it's the right thing, it can be a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I've had so many beautiful, wonderful, meaningful moments many years after, 30 years after now, that are all really are because of that moment.
Yeah. I think the preparation before seeing Pinky Nelson, helps create that memory and tattoos that memory, because once you get to that moment, you're prepared and you're super excited because you've done your research. You understand how big of a deal it is to meet this individual. Mm-hmm. I have a similar memory, but not the same outcome. This is for Stewart basketball camp. I lived in Chicago, so I'm a Northerner as well. Sure. I went to Michael Jordan's basketball camp. It was, like 5th, 6th grade, something like that. And, he's an idol in the prime of his career. And he would show up every once in a while and play ball, a little bit of that, and then take off. And then his people would do the camp. Mm-hmm. They had a 3-on-3 basketball tournament. Jordan comes into my court and starts refereeing my game. And so I'm thinking of him like a god at the time. Yeah. And the ball goes out of bounds. I'm going to inbound the ball. Michael Jordan's handing me the basketball. And I'm just sitting up there at him looking, just jaw dropped. And the only thing that came out of my mouth is, nice bracelet. Because he had a gold bracelet on, and he looked at me. He's like, "Go ahead and inbound the ball, bud." So that was my moment to shine with the GOAT.
And that changed your life trajectory, right?
Yeah. I'm an NBA player now.
Gave you meaning and purpose.
That's
and
right.
Just like a skrrr. All right. I was going to tell my story, but I can't beat that.
Can't one up it?
I can't one up that story.
So you progress through that great experience, and now you have a career path like from an early age. So it looks like you did several internships in the media journalism space
Sure.
to really ignite that fire.
Sure. But it started even before that. In sixth grade at the same elementary school, we had a newspaper. And so I ended up just kind of taking charge. And that was kind of my first newspaper experience. And then I was involved in our junior high newspaper. And then in high school, I was involved in our high school paper. And I ended up becoming editor of our high school campus newspaper. So even before college, I was doing all this stuff. Like in the summers, I was obsessed. I would watch the news in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is actually a very good news, educated news market. Lots of really strong journalists have come from. There's a long, rich tradition of journalism there. So I happened to grow up in a place where journalism was well done on many different platforms, including television. So I would spend my summers, as the dork that I was, watching local news, taking notes. I would watch the noon news and the 5 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news. And then I would type up my scripts and then present the news from my kitchen table like I was a newscaster, but based on real news of the day. So I was crazy long before college. But then I get to college. I'm involved in the campus radio and campus TV and then the campus newspaper. I went to DePauw University in Indiana with a W, not with an L in Chicago. A lot of people confuse it. It's a liberal arts school in the middle of Indiana with a really rich, wonderful journalism tradition. And I was in that media center at DePauw Media Center where they housed print and radio and TV. I was there all 4 years, all the time. I lived there. I ate my meals there. I did my homework there. And so I was heavily involved in the campus newspaper called The DePauw. Became editor my senior year. I was crazy. I just did it all the time. And that's even before I hit any of the internships. So it's like, I'm doing all this stuff, living and breathing it and just in love with it. Never got tired of it.
So not to short circuit or yada, yada, yada over that, but, but after college, where does that track take you? Obviously journalism you stay on the rails there, but you're headed somewhere. Where are you going?
Yeah. And so I did, an internship at, a TV station in DC during the 2000 election, and then newspaper internships in Minneapolis and Norfolk, Virginia. And then finally landed at the Dallas Morning News, Washington DC bureau the summer after college. And I thought I had made it. Like I thought this was the pinnacle. It was, Dallas Morning News is still quite a good newspaper, but has always been historically one of the better papers in the country. And so I got an opportunity to be a reporting intern at the Dallas Morning News in their Washington, D.C. bureau. This was a summer in D.C. right after the 2001 terrorist attacks. And so there's a lot of legislation in the works about creating the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, these were big times. President George W. Bush, was in the White House, and he's from Texas. So, apparently he read the Dallas Morning News in the White House. And so we had, I think 14 or 15 reporters, correspondents in the bureau at that time. That's a huge number of people to be covering DC from a non-national newspaper. Right. So that was an incredible opportunity. And fortunately, it went well. And toward the end of the summer, they said, let's see if we can get you a job back at the mothership in Dallas and see, what we can do there. So that led to an interview in Dallas. And I was offered a job to work as a reporter. For me at 22 to start my career at the Dallas Morning News, that was a big deal. I'm normally a modest person, but that was a big deal. And that was in 2002. And a lot has changed since then in journalism, in life, in technology,
and pace of news. I think. I mean, we'll probably get to that in a minute.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it seems crazy. All right, so you had Irving and City Hall. Obviously, you lead the Irving beat. Where's that? Still at the Dallas Morning News is the next part. Where does that take us?
I become a general assignment reporter. So, for me, this is where I start to get some pep in my step as a reporter, because I always gravitated toward creative almost quirky things, human interest stories, stories about people. So I started moving away from city hall government stuff, and started kind of getting embedded in families' lives and reporting on turning points in people's lives. One example, a mother who lost her son in a traffic accident, a car crash, and she decides to donate his organs. But she goes beyond that. She's on a mission to track down all the people who received her son's organs, his heart, his lung, etc. And she makes it her mission to find these people and to stay in touch with them. And, even to the point of feeling her son's heartbeat and going into her home and having her talk about that loss and explain it in a way where I understand what she's saying, where she's coming from. And then to make sense of that and to write it in a way that's engaging and that the average reader will understand it, but that accurately portrays what happened, but conveying the essence and the humanity of what this mother went through. And then I realized, wow, these are the kinds of stories I really enjoy telling because they're about people going through really hellish things in their lives where your life changes in an instant. And how do you get through that? How do you grapple with that? And for some people, it takes a lifetime to get through that. But then to have people welcome me into their homes and share those real intimate moments, I got much more meaning out of what I was doing when I started doing those types of stories.
I am something vastly short of a journalist, but we've had a couple of those moments on the podcast where you just get down to a story that a couple times I've just gotten the chilly bumps as people have told it, and you're like, man.
Oh, I think
that's real.
Your conversation was with Holly Crowder and how she lost her husband.
Yes.
I mean, that was really moving. And so you're creating a safe space, whether it's a podcast format now or back then, or still now, print interviews where you're kind of sitting one-on-one without a camera. And a journalist hopefully is creating a safe space to allow someone to be the essence of who they are. Because this is all really contrived, right? We've got microphones in front of us right now. Or if you're just a print reporter, back then I still had a tape recorder because I wanted to capture everything. You're still kind of setting up something to kind of plow through that, though, and to allow the person to be who they are and share their moments with you. There's so much trust that someone has in a journalist when they decide to share their story. And it's a true honor and privilege ultimately when you have the chance to talk to someone about their story. Because everyone has a story. Everyone's got a story. Some people have incredible thousands of stories they could share, right?
Yeah, right.
But everyone, no matter who we are on this planet, where no matter what our background is, we all have a story. And we may not think it's that interesting, but more often than not, it is pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there are parts of our stories generically that are mundane, right? But there are parts that are poignant.
For me personally, I get so much out of it because these meaningful moments that linger with you for decades to come, things that I'll remember as long as I can remember something, as long as I can remember things. There's so much power there that you don't realize. And the feedback that you get from people, you start to realize, oh, people are paying attention to this. They got it. And not only did it click with people, it caused them to take action. They actually wrote something down. They jotted off an email, or they typed up an old-fashioned note, or they wrote a note and they mailed it to me. It generated such an emotional response that it leads someone to do that. There's a lot of power there. It's an honor. It's really an honor to capture people's lives, to capture the humanity of people's lives. It's so layered. And I didn't realize this in third grade. I just thought it was.
I thought you were clairvoyant in the third grade. You had it all hemmed up, man.
But then, there's another story that I really want to share. I don't know if this is the right time, or if you want to talk about other stuff.
Oh, I know a story that I want you to share, but I don't think we're to it yet.
Okay. Oh boy,
the state fair related story.
Oh, state fair. Yeah. So I was at the Dallas Morning News for 11 years. And so for the last several years, I wrote general assignment stories, human interest stories. And I just love these, slices of life stories. But my favorite story, I think, is we heard about a goose. It's about a goose.
I've heard this one too. Go on.
That we had heard that there's this goose in the Dallas suburb of Rowlett that was getting out of a pond and escorting kids to school. I'm like, what? And it's like, okay, I got to check this out. And this is our daughter at the time was very young. So I was not used to like getting up early to drive to school or anything like that. So I drive to the school that I reach out to the school and I find out what's going on. I get some contact information. And so then I get there before the kids start approaching school. Cause as a journalist, you want to be there for the whole thing. You want to capture the whole thing. But I was a little skeptical because I wasn't sure what was exactly going on. Like, is this really happening? So I get to the intersection. I meet the crossing guard who's walking these kids across the street to get to school. And here comes this goose out of the pond, waddling up. They named him Sam. And all of a sudden one day, he just decided to start getting out of the pond and was hanging out with the students and then started to actually walk with the crossing guard and walk the students across the street to get to school. And then walk the students back, walk back and forth. And then he eventually took ownership. Like he became the crossing guard and he would squawk at people who were, cars that may be driving too quickly or people getting too close to the students. It was the most magical, beautiful, wonderful, wondrous scene. I was so taken aback by what I had just witnessed. And I interviewed a whole bunch of kids and I interviewed the crossing guard and tried to interview the goose, but the goose, was honking. I remember the picture perfect sunrise, like a cotton candy sunrise. And I remember driving back from the assignment. I pulled over. This is before smartphones. I pulled over and in my notebook, I was jotting down fairy tale. Like this is a fairy tale. This is a children's book story. And so I ended up going back to the newsroom and I had the time, like they gave me a few days to write something. And I said, I'm just going to try this out. I'm going to write it like it's a fairy tale. And let me read some of it to you, if you don't mind. This appeared in the Dallas Morning News, on the cover of the Metro section. The headline is "Take a Gander at This Curious Bird" at a friendly neighborhood crosswalk, a story straight from Mother Goose. Once upon a time, down a 2-lane road, past a field with horses and near an elementary school, a big old goose lived in a sparkling blue pond. Each morning, the goose saw children laughing and talking while walking to school. 2 friendly crossing guards helped the children cross a busy intersection to get to class. He was intrigued, this curious goose. One day in February, he left his pond pals, a duck and a swan, and waddled through the grass past the large rocks onto the sidewalk to the intersection. The crossing guards were surprised to find the goose at their side, and they were concerned. Cars, trucks, and school buses zoomed through the intersection. They worried he would get hurt, but this was a fearless goose. So that story, first of all, I wrote it like that, and it got through. I'm so glad it did, because it was worthy of that kind of treatment. So you imagine you're reading the newspaper, and then you come across this story, right? It's not your traditional story, and the reaction I got blew me away. This was right before Twitter. This was when Twitter and Facebook were in their infancy. So it didn't go viral in the traditional sense,
sure,
but it went viral in another way. Newsrooms across the country were sharing the story with each other. Readers were in tears, they told me. One said, "I'm going to read this to my grandchildren tonight. This would be a great children's book." All these things. Again, it caused such a reaction that people wrote down in their own words what this story meant to them. They mailed the letters to me. They called me up. They sent emails. I was so overwhelmed by that response. I didn't know that was going to generate that response. I was just pleased I came across this incredible scene and got the chance and the creative freedom to write it in a way that I thought the treatment that it deserved, because it was something special. Again, it's the power of storytelling. Talk about journalism, about, we need to hold elected leaders accountable. We need to cover what's happening at the State House. We need to uncover wrongdoing. We need to keep track of legislation. We need to report all these important things. But let's not forget these moments of life, these slices of life that hopefully unite all of us in one way or another.
You don't see that much in our current news cycle. I mean, even when I'm not a newspaper reader, but even on the evening news or what, it's just news, and off to Jimmy Kimmel. And oftentimes, even when, that'll give you some indication of what news channel I watch. But even then, if they do throw in like these interest pieces at this juncture, like my brain is so conditioned to not hearing or listening to or for them. When I get one, I'm like, well, this is time to go do something else. Like I let them pass me by.
Yep.
Because I'm not conditioned to see them. Like that's not how I'm conditioned to hear, process, and consume news in 2021.
We've been conditioned to consume news in different ways now. And you can still find those stories, but they're harder to find. But today now, like, CBS Sunday Morning, which is a very reflective program, has a very loyal audience. They have those stories occasionally. NPR is known for driveway moments where you have a story on the radio. It's, it captivates you, takes you somewhere, and it's called a driveway moment because you're driving home and, you're so engaged in the story that you can't turn off the car. You have to hang out in your car while the radio story concludes so you can get to the final, part of the story.
I want to stop down on something.
Yeah.
Because the George Floyd trial, we're, 2 days off a verdict. Is that right? One day? Was it yesterday?
It was two days ago.
2 days ago. I want to ask you about that moment because I'm sure you guys were doing exactly what we were doing at the office, which was staring at the television, watching to see what was going to happen. We were sitting in my office, sort of the ticker was going, it was like expected at 3:30 or whatever it was. And so we're sitting there at 3:15 talking about the moment and what it meant. And I thought, is this, how big is this? How big is this moment? And I'm curious how it felt in the newsroom.
So, a lot of us are working remotely now. So I was at home in my kitchen when the verdict came down. So I can't really offer like a newsroom atmosphere perspective, but, we had reporters in place ready to get reaction from people. But that verdict's a big deal. What happened to George Floyd, as horrible as that was, it ignited worldwide protests and tough conversations and, bringing things to the surface that, Black people in particular, but people of color in general, have felt for a long time, and that maybe certain white people didn't understand or really get, or, couldn't put their heads around. And so the protests that were sparked, the conversations that have been sparked in workplaces, and the importance of diversity and equity inclusion, a lot of companies have really pushed that forward if they weren't doing it before. Mm-hmm. I think many were doing it before, but now really more concerted effort. So this verdict, it does not close the chapter at all. It does not provide closure at all. But that's a big moment. And I think we're going to reflect on that for generations to come. I mean, we're so close to the moment right now that we don't have the distance in the history yet. But I think once we do, historians will look back at this as one of those really changing point moments in the way America is heading and the direction in which it's heading.
I think maybe the thing you said that resonated most was I think history will look back on it as a big moment. Not just now, not just in this emotional phase of it and this reckoning with it and this conversation we'll have. But I think history looks back on that and says that was an inflection point. Let's talk about leadership in the newsroom, right? Because you have a presumably, a team of people that you're coordinating and collaborating with as you guys put pieces out. And so tell us a little bit about that process and some tips and tricks and ideas of leading that group and challenges associated with it. I'll just give you that softball and see where you hit it.
So I oversee the day-to-day news operation for radio and for our digital platforms. And so we have about 40 content creators, reporters, producers, editors, hosts. They're not all involved in daily news, but most of them touch our daily news report in one way or another at some point on a weekly basis. And so I oversee what we're covering, who's covering it. Do we have person A cover it or person B? If person B is not available, can we get person C or person D? Who can get out to the press conference at this time to cover it? Of all the stories happening, prioritizing what are the things that we feel the audience should know about. We're really trying to be audience focused and give them not just the news of the moment of the day, but stories with depth and perspective that public media is known for, kind of going underneath the surface and explaining why things are the way they are. So I oversee all of that. It's the ultimate high wire act where there are deadlines all the time. We have newscasts throughout the day on the radio. We want to have those reflect what's happening in the moment. And we're not covering car crashes. We're not covering a lot of crime, but we're covering a lot of government, a lot of policy, a lot of community news. And with COVID, a lot of, obviously the past year, we've been inundated with all sorts of news developments and vaccines now. When are they coming to Texas? How are they getting distributed? Where are the hiccups? How do you people who don't have cell phone access, how do you find ways to get them to get somewhere to sign up for an appointment to get a vaccine? Countless things that are stories, and you have to decide each day what you're going to cover and what's worth coverage, what's worth putting off to another day. I'm making probably hundreds of decisions each day that I don't even realize, trying to figure out like what's worth getting out there for the audience, because our audience is growing. More people are turning to public media over time. And so there's a big responsibility now. We're almost like a primary news source for certain people, whereas before we were kind of a secondary news source. And so trying to balance the news in the moment with that in-depth stuff that public media is known for, where you really spend 4, 5, 6 minutes on the radio, which is an eternity in broadcast news. And if you watch your network news stories, your local news, that might be 90 seconds. If you're lucky to get that kind of story out from a reporter, well, we give reporters many minutes on the air to explore something. So it's deciding like what's worth covering, what needs more reporting. So I'm working with reporters on editing pieces and making sure it's clear and concise and conveying information and emotion, drawing on my reporting experience, trying to figure out, again, you want to make this stuff easy to digest for someone who's just listening, for someone who's like in the car and distracted, or they're getting dinner ready, or they've got kids in the back and they're all screaming, being mindful that people are living busy lives, and how do you present information in a way that's accessible and consumable so they understand what's happening. So I'm like the nerve center where a lot of things come through me, where I have to sign off or agree on what should we do. And people, want more time for a story. And I'm like, we can't give you that much time for a story. You have to do it in 3 minutes. You can't have 6 minutes. So a lot of that kind of stuff. It's exciting. It's exhilarating. It's exhausting. Like you're always on. I get up and get my kids ready for school, and then, leading a daily morning meeting where we talk about what we're working on, and making sure these things are actually happening, because it's like when you're a daily news service, you're providing, you have to have something in the works at all times. Like right. You can't just kind of take it easy. We collaborate with other stations across the state, so we share stories and content that way. So trying to tell the story of North Texas in the moment and why things are the way they are. So I have about 6 direct reports. And so I'm also trying to motivate and mentor and manage them while also covering the news, which I also consider kind of a direct report. the news itself. It's quite the beast. And as a manager and a leader, I'm trying really hard now, especially in the last year or so, to carve out time to be really intentional about like thinking about what's coming up, like what's around the corner as a news story that we should be anticipating, or an issue, but also carving out time to develop careers. Because we're not just covering the news. We've got human beings, real life people who are trying to grow their careers and have passions and things that they want to work on. And to try to carve out time for folks to do the things that they would also like to do as journalists.
I was talking to somebody this morning actually about the transition from project management to people management and how it's a giant leap. You might be great at project management. You're like, well, my natural progression is to lead a team. You're like, wow, this is uncharted waters. And looking through your bio, I saw main responsibility, focus on helping people do their best work. What does that look like in the media space with your editors and production team? How do you carve out that time, and what does that time look like with your team so you can build them up and be intentional?
Yeah. When I became managing editor and when it was announced to the staff, the thing I told them is, I want you to do your best work. That doesn't mean that you get 6 months to work on every project. That means a lot to you, but that more often than not, that you're doing work that's satisfying and fulfilling. Like there's work that we have to do in journalism or in any industry, right? There's stuff that you have to do, that you need to do, but there should be time to carve out for each individual stuff that's tailored to their interests, that satisfies like a passion project or some topic that they really want to invest in. For someone, it might be an in-depth dive into immigration issues. For someone else, it might be like an in-depth conversation and taking a 30-minute conversation and editing it down in a way, maybe perhaps a mini podcast. For others, it might just be trying to develop skills like how to make your story resonate more online. For some people, they've just got some really good ideas, some deep, thoughtful ideas, and finding the time for them, protecting their time so that they can make some progress. The issue is balancing that, right? Balancing the passion stuff with the day-to-day stuff. And not everyone's good with time management. So helping people like plot out their week or the next couple of weeks. Like, here's how I see success for you on this. A story that will be on the air in 4 weeks. This week and next week, I encourage you to do this, this, and this. Do your research, do your reporting, line up your interviews. The following week, get all this together, do the writing, do the editing, and then we'll do a final edit and then get it on the air or online. So a lot of it is plotting out people's time so that they can see, like, we don't have a vision for the story necessarily, but we have a framework, a roadmap to make it happen. And then I, as a manager, have to be committed to giving people the time to do a little bit at a time. Like you may be able to take out a chunk of that, like one interview one morning, and then the next day you transcribe those notes or you do research for the next interview, and little bits, like, and really walking them through. Some people need that direct, deep intervention, like helping, like crystallize for them. Other people, they've got it.
Right.
Like, and it just depends on your skill level. It depends on who you are. It depends on how you manage your time. It's personalities. This is all about people. I tell new managers in journalism, it's like, I wish we all had studied psychology or had psychology degrees, because it does come down to people and people's strengths and people, what makes people tick and what sets people off. And not to avoid that, because I do try to address conflict and take on issues so people can grow. Because I think when there's tension or something not quite right, you need to live it and embrace it and address it so that we can work through it. But it can be a learning experience too. So it's really about meeting people where they're at, but also having a vision for them, even if it's a short-term vision of how this story or project can be pulled off. And the person may not realize that. And as a manager, you're kind of helping them along the way. But people, it's the psychology that I was talking about. Everyone, we all, and also modern management now, and the new generation, this younger generation, where they're much more open about expressing concerns and thoughts and feelings about what's happening in their lives, or this isn't right, we should do better, whether it's better family leave policies or work-life balance, more flexibility. This younger generation, we have to give them credit for this, is that they're pushing a lot of this out in the open and forcing organizations to figure out ways to become more adaptive and more responsive and more open about trying things out a different way. Not that I as a manager went through this, so therefore you're going to go through this. Well, there's a lot of that in journalism. I, as a journalist, did this, and this, and I'm going to expect you to do the same thing. It's just kind of like a rite of passage or hazing almost. And that's just not we should always be working on trying to improve processes so that we're improving things along the way. People have so many things they want. It's so much more than work. For journalism, it's a calling. There's a lot of passion, a lot of emotion involved with it. And as a manager, as a leader, you have to carve out time to address that. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to have conversations. You have to. It's not a one conversation. It's an evolving thing, a discussion, dialogue over time about like what's someone's real reason for being here. Like, what is their strength that they want to work on? What can we do to get you the next level as a journalist in terms of that strength? But also, how can we develop the weakness that's improve so that weakness is no longer a weakness or is less of a weakness? So it comes down to being a good listener and being empathetic. It comes down to that all the time. Listening to what someone is trying to tell you or what they can't quite articulate, but they want to tell you. They may be scared to tell you. creating a safe space, it's the same thing as when you interview someone for a story. It's the same thing the way you treat an employee, a direct report, or someone who doesn't report to you but just wants to bounce something off you. Creating a safe space where people feel comfortable talking with you. And as a white man, I'm a good listener. Lots of white men aren't good listeners. Women are really good leaders, and women just haven't had the chance for the most part to get into those leadership positions. But so I try to really listen and just I turn the phone away. I've got the person's attention. They've got my attention. I'm focused on what they're trying to say. I've got back before COVID in my office. I had this sign on the board, a whiteboard that says "Vent, Advice, or Solve." Is someone in my office just a vent? Because I'm a problem solver. So it's like when someone comes to me, I'm like, immediately, how can I solve this problem? What can I do to make this person, to give this person some relief? Because this is clearly bothering them. And they're like, no, you don't have to do anything right now. I just want to tell you about this. So are someone there to vent? Does someone want advice? Maybe it's an issue they're dealing with another supervisor or colleague, and they trust me to share their intimate thoughts on this issue. And they just want, as an elder statesman now with 20 years of experience and lots of gray hair and, lots of darkened, bloodshot eyes from no sleep. I guess I look the part that I've got some experience to offer. So I offer advice. And then sometimes they want me to solve. They want me to take action. It's urgent or it's something that needs to be addressed that we can't really give it more time. So knowing what the person is hoping to accomplish, but also not being intimidating, being approachable. I'm very self-deprecating. I make fun of myself all the time. And I think people get that. And so I'm approachable. Like I realize as an editor, that's an intimidating position. I mean, when I was a youngster and all the top editors at the Dallas Morning News or other publications, it was intimidating. I would have never gone up to someone like that and kind of say, hey, can we talk? But I'm hoping to cultivate an environment where people feel like they can be their authentic selves, which allows them to do their best work over time and hopefully do the best work of their careers at some point. Not that every story, not that everything they do is going to be top notch, but that over time they can point to things where they're heading in the right direction. And for me, I don't have any management experience. In journalism, the thing is you're a good reporter or producer, and then you kind of get promoted into management. And that's not necessarily the right way of doing things. And I'm sure in other industries, it's the same thing. You have no idea what you're doing. I became a manager and I was filling in for a year beforehand. They were kind of testing me out, which was good. I'm glad I had that experience. But once it was officially assigned to me, hey, you're the managing editor, you have these direct reports. I had never directly manage people on a daily basis before, aside from filling in here and there. And so I had people with 30 years of experience reporting to me and newbies reporting to me and people in between. And it requires a different approach to everyone. I kind of learned as I went, and people were patient with me because I think I was am approachable. And I think people relate to me in that it's because people often talk about the passion I have for journalism, and it's the passion I have for them. Like I got into journalism because of the journalism, and now I'm in journalism because of the journalists, because of the people. And I'm glad now I'm in management. That's scary to utter out loud, but I really thrive on. I get frustrated a lot. I get frustrated a lot, but every night I'm drained. But then in the morning, I always want to get out of bed and pop up and think, oh, okay, let's try this a different way, or let's see if I can pull this out today. So, endless challenges, so many puzzle pieces I'm putting together. So it's like I'm covering the news, and we're covering the news, but I'm also having to manage people and emotions, and it's a lot. I need a break.
I need that venting advice.
Yeah, that's good.
Solve, but I need it laminated and I need it at home. So then I don't get in the doghouse with my wife when she's talking. I'm like, which one do you want? I just point to the menu, because I go straight to solve every single time. So when it's story time, maybe it's just venting time.
Yeah. And that came from somewhere in social media. I wish I knew who came up with that. I did not come up with that, but it was one of those things from social media that's actually helpful.
I'm going to start doing that, pointing. Sadie, which one do you want?
Yeah, those are good. There's a couple good things in there. The passion project thing is interesting to me too. Like never have I ever talked about that at work. Like, what is it that you'd want to just tackle around here, and let's dedicate an hour or two a week to it. And Make this place better because of it.
It's all about being intentional. I think in any industry, any field, you can do this. Even if you don't do it right now, like what's carving out time each week, even if it's an hour, and whatever gets you ticking, like whatever is the thing that you've not been able to accomplish or been able to do, like what can you do, and what progress can you make in that hour? And over time, it may take 6 months, it may take a year, it may take 2 years, but if you're making a little bit of progress all the way, it's so motivating to the employee. Like there's only so much you can do in terms of salary and benefits and work-life balance, and journalism's crazy and all these hours and all this tension and all these issues and chaos, but you can give people some time to make some progress and stuff they care about. Over time, they build these skills. I think it allows people to bring their true selves into the workplace in special ways. So there's the stuff you have to do and you need to do, but then the stuff that you kind of get to be creative about. And then if people take that the right way and they run with it, I mean, that can explode their careers. That can take them to the next level. That can get them the next big job. So I'm still new to management. I've only been doing it for 5 years. I learn a lot all the time, and I'm eager to see where this goes. I'm eager to see where I can take it. Hopefully in journalism, we're on shaky ground in general. With the stuff we've talked about, nothing's for certain, but it comes back to being a good listener. It comes back to empathy. And it comes back to, ultimately it's about being comfortable with who you are, as a manager or as a human being. It's like knowing your flaws, knowing your blind spots as a manager, not giving the vibe that you know it all, being humble, acknowledging when you make a mistake, acknowledging that, hey, maybe I didn't say that the right way, or could have said that a different way. But also whatever flaws you have, knowing that, a listening skill I learned years ago is I was in choir for many, many years. And I remember our choir director, I was in 4th grade, and we were singing in a choir in a rehearsal, and we were kind of hear all sorts of voices all over the place. And she stopped us and she goes, you got to listen to each other. You got to stop and listen. Stop and listen and hear the other singer next to you singing. Because then when you can hear that other person, you're not going to be overpowering your voice. You're not going to stick out. If you're in a choir, you're trying to have a blended sound. And if you have everyone not listening, kind of singing at whatever level, then it's all, the sound just shoots out and it's all jarring. But if you're listening to each other, then if you can hear the other person singing, then that may tamp down the amount of singing you're doing, and it allows for more blending. It allows for a uniform choral sound. And granted, that was a music and a singing technique, but that was also a life lesson I've taken with me, is the importance of pausing and listening and understanding what someone else is singing or saying. That's also something. It's listening, and it's being empathetic, and it's stuff that it's something we should strive to chip away at a little bit over time, because those are life lessons. If you're a good listener to your spouse or to your loved ones or to your children or to your neighbors, I mean, that's going to help you in so many ways. You're building more authentic connections, I think. We want to be our authentic selves, right? We want to be comfortable in our own skin with who we are. And if we acknowledge the flaws and the faults, don't beat ourselves up about it, make plans to kind of improve those a little bit for self-improvement over time, then we're all heading in the right direction and kind of being the humans that we all kind of want to be. Recently, as part of a leadership thing, I was part of an anonymous survey where 360-degree feedback. Yeah. First time I had ever done that. I was really intrigued. Nervous. I mean, I think I take feedback pretty well. People have said a lot of things to me through the years, and I'm a big boy. But I was eager, a little anxious too, about what this feedback would say. And it was really heartfelt stuff. People saying, he's the best boss I've ever had, or he's got really strong emotional intelligence, or he's a really good listener, or he's a really good problem solver, or he's so passionate about what he does and it's infectious. And to read those comments, I mean, they weren't paid, right? They chose to write that. It was anonymous too, right? Some people could have really really, knocked me down if they wanted to. And for the most part, it was really positive stuff. And so I encourage everyone in leadership to try to do an anonymous survey, anonymous feedback, and do it maybe once a year if you can, and to really get a sense of what people are wanting to tell you, but maybe can't tell you. Ideally, though, you're in a situation where people will pull you over and go, hey, that didn't go that well. You didn't, what you said, or this is bothering someone. You should be aware of it. Not that I have to react to every little piece of feedback, but it's being situationally aware so that you can convey the message that you want to convey in the way it's meant to be conveyed, instead of conveying it in a way where the people don't focus on the message, they focus on the tone or how it was delivered. And then it's all noise. They get distracted by that instead of the message you're trying to deliver. So, anonymous feedback, I think, is a really effective tool. But it also showed me that I feel like I'm on the right path. I don't have it all figured out, but I think I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing as a leader. And the fact that I get to do it in journalism, which is what I've wanted to do since I was a kid. I mean, the fact that I'm leading a group in a newsroom in journalism, which is something I care about, it gives me purpose. It gives me determination. It gives me pleasure. It gives me real enjoyment that I'm embracing the beauty of life, and that I'm in a position to kind of take that in and let it permeate through me, the good and the bad. And it goes back to third grade. It goes back to that moment 30 years ago. Everything, it does. And this may not last forever, right? I may get hit by a bus, or I may get fired, or I may get laid off, and it may be done. But I can say that I did something substantial. I'm not a brand name network news anchor or anything, but that I made a mark in my own way. And I have helped improve careers and lives and livelihoods, and improve the atmosphere for certain people, and helping fuel them, giving them a sense of purpose too.
Usually we end with like the one big thing, but I feel like a few minutes ago we kind of hit that skid talking about listening, empathy, being heard. Like we heard a lot of like real things that resonate in terms of leadership and kind of the big takeaways here. So I don't think we need to go back to that. I feel like we just leave it there, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.